Catching up with Sarah and Ginny, fueled by laughter and insights aplenty. Curiosity, connection, and learning that sticks. Real talk, real lives with practical tips. Welcome to Catching Up with Sarah and Ginny. Come on in.
If Send were a song, Carl, what would it be and why?
Well, you know the answer to this. It will be simply Eye of the Tiger. Eye of the Tiger by Survivor, I believe. Yes, Survivor. My heart always goes out to, especially when you're dealing with children that have had a really difficult upbringing. My heart always goes out to them because they don't realize, maybe many years later, and I was one of those kids. It takes, so to reference myself, it takes many years and possibly therapy too, and great mentors to realize that, wow, sheesh, you had a tough start in life, the thing with education is that we all say to the kids, you're all on the same start line. We almost see it like a race, like a marathon. And everybody's at the same start and everybody's running along, but we're not in reality. Some people are not even in the stadium, Some people are in another country to get to that start line. So I always like the song by Survivor because, the Eye of the Tiger, rising up, back on the streets, did my time, took my chances. That's the only vocals you're going to get, guys. I'm not singing anymore. I'm not a great singer. But, it's about having that will and having that fire. And I remember saying to some of my kids, especially when we had like the small nurture groups, and they're saying, what area I'm from and I'm not going to make it in life. And I'll say that you've got an advantage that other people do not have. You've got these disadvantages you think are disadvantages. You've got grit. You've got resilience, right? There's some people, you say that the rich kid is going to private school. When a bad thing happens to him, he falls over or she falls over. You've been hit by some of the hardest things that adults can't even take, but you're still here. So you have got a superpower, whether you realize it or not. So it's building that fire and desire in that young person to say that, you know what, no matter what. And I love Rocky. I think Rocky's such a motivational film that you can go the distance. You may not be the smartest, you may not be the fastest, but it's that iron chin. It's that eye of the tiger to keep pounding the pavement, the thrill of the fight, to say, no matter how bad it gets, I'm still going to be in it. I'm still going to be in the ring, whether I win, lose or draw. And it's building that fire. So for me, it's always Eye of the Tiger.
Love it. Love it. And I think it's acknowledging what you have got in your toolkit. I love this idea of we all have a toolkit. And actually, like you're saying about resilience, about what have we got that we can use to get through some inverted commas fights. So I absolutely love that, Carl.
If you join this membership, I'm going to be telling you to do everything the opposite of what you've been told to do as a teacher. I was like, people who sign up for this membership are basically signing up to something where I'm going, well, we're not going to put displays on the walls. Let's get rid of plastic chairs. You don't have to sit on the sofa, on the floor and cross your legs. Actually, let's completely change lunch times and dinner times and all of these things that are the norm in school that, as you say, Ginny, like teachers think they have to do. And it's so interesting hearing you say that about permission because, yes, it's a culture we've created. So there's a culture in schools whereby teachers and head teachers, the whole culture of the school believes we have to have displays, we have to have work on walls, we have to say you've got to cross your legs on the carpet. And if we don't do some of these things that are just part of school, Ofsted will come in and say, you're not doing what you should be doing. And it's a real thing. Like don't we need to have displays for Ofsted? Oh, don't we need to do that for Ofsted? And actually, now that I've transformed enough schools and I've worked and doing enough environments, because that's one of the big things I do is take everything out and put new stuff in, we've had so many schools Ofsteded. And actually, what we find is that, and I've spoken directly to more than one Ofsted inspector as well, and they all say there's nowhere that says you have to have displays. No. There's nowhere that says you must have washing lines with all the work on it. It might be the mandatory non-negotiable of the school, but it's not a mandatory non-negotiable of the framework of what we expect to see in schools. It's a cultural thing. And all of those schools that have made those changes, because I say don't have display boards. Now that to some head teachers is like, what? Excuse me, none at all. I was in a school the other day and I was looking at his environments and I'm going to transform his spaces. And he was like, so what about the walls? And I was like, well, you take all the display boards down. And he was like, all of them, no display boards. okay. So no displays. And I was like, no displays. And I was like, if it's uncomfortable, you could maybe have one or two. But my honest advice would be no displays. And he was like, no, I'm on board. And then about 10 minutes later, so no displays on the walls. Just like, but then when you speak to Ofsted actually have gone into all of the schools I've transformed with no displays. And the environment has been championed in the report as being one of the biggest strengths. And all of them have had the environments highlighted in the report. So that's the complete opposite of what we expect. And those perceptions that you were saying, Ginny, of being like, well, am I allowed to do this? I think we need to be like, it doesn't matter if you're allowed or not allowed. Does the child need this?
Yes.
That should be
Yes.
our
Yeah.
compass. Do you know what I
And
mean?
what outcomes? Yeah, and what outcomes do you want? What we going for? What we trying to achieve?
I do like the word challenge, because I think as human beings, we are generally quite fearful of challenge. For
Yeah.
example, you know, if you were going to a buffet, right, you would probably go and pick the things off that buffet that you know are going to tickle your taste buds, right? But would you try something that you think, oh, I don't know about that. I don't know. You know, that for me, food is one of the biggest challenges for me. Food and people and logistics and traveling. So, you know, that's really interesting because I think we all have different types of challenges, don't we?
Yeah.
And I think there's critical challenge, there's emotional challenge, there's pedagogical challenge, and biggest of all, there's social and human challenge. And I don't think we actually talk about challenge enough from an individual perspective, particularly for some of our non-verbal SEND learners, because let's be fair, they can't always tell us, but they may show us. And that's where we've got to have eyes and ears everywhere.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I love that though with the food. I'm really fussy with my food, and my son's quite fussy with his food. And I know that we went on holiday recently, and we were trying to get him to try a different thing every day. And he said, actually, if I'm trying something new every day, Mum, why don't you try something new every day? And I was a bit like, oh, do I have to? I really don't want to. And it's really funny because he's like, pickles. We're going to get you to try pickles. And yeah, it's that importance of us all embracing challenge, understanding challenge, talking about challenge, talking about actually, I feel a bit uncomfortable about that. I really don't want to eat that pickle.
Yeah.
You know, and having those open discussions that that's all right to feel like that.
And you know, now you're talking about pickles, my brain's going tick, 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 because how many different versions of pickles are there? Because there's a pickle,
Yeah.
and there's something
Right,
that is
yeah.
pickled, right? So you could have a pickled egg. Oh, let's not even go there. Oh, right, okay. But you can have a pickle. So are you talking about anything that's onion based as a pickle?
I think so, yeah. I think so.
Right,
And I think
okay.
we were in Spain, and I think there was like, it was a buffet, you know, the all inclusive. So you had loads of different kinds of things that could be considered. And so he was like, oh, I think we'll do this one today. And I think some I was like, okay. And then others I'm like, yeah, I'm really just not feeling this actually. But yeah, it's just interesting when you talk about that, because how do you set up those situations where you can then realistically discuss how that makes you feel?
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
absolutely.
there's the whole thing, the circle model. And I know I was working with some schools from Gloucestershire. There, you know, they've got that embedded for staff well-being. The whole thing about, and there were some staff that didn't want to sit in the circle and talk about how they felt or how they. And actually, we do that in the classroom all the time, and it's a really well-established thing we do. And it's like trying to build these things in as actually opportunities to talk about. It's okay if, you know, your window of tolerance isn't at that point where you're okay with this today, or you're able to talk about these things actually, but just having discussions. I think we don't have enough.
We tend to give more choices to adults, don't we? So for example, okay, the three of us, we are, you know, we're international consultants, advisors, and we travel the world and we go and we speak to people, right? And we give people choices as to whether or not they would like to respond or be part of this group, etc., etc. Because when you're in that situation yourself, it can actually break you. And I always like to use the words, I'd like to invite you, right? So I say to everybody, you know, will never ask anybody to do something that you're
That's
not
okay, yeah,
comfortable to
yeah.
do. Well, I'd like to invite you, okay? But when in a classroom situation or in school situations, right? There isn't that flexibility. The
No.
slinkiness is gone, girls. The slinkiness is
The
gone.
flexibility, that's the thing, isn't it? There isn't. So you
And
can't quite do that.
Slinky.
Yeah.
Slinky. You know, it's that whole thing of like being able to be sort of a little bit like that, the flexibility. So why are we doing it? Or we're aware that it's happening, and why are we allowing it to still be part of our classrooms? Or not necessarily classrooms, but our educational communities.
Yeah.
So I can see the social medias now coming through with the direct messages, you know, da 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 da. Da. You said and you said, yeah, I am saying because that's what I feel, and
Yeah.
I listen to you because that's what you're saying and that's
Yeah.
what you
You
feel.
feeling as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think all of this, you know, there's so many valid discussions.
The book that I would choose therefore is James Boswell's Life of Samuel Johnson, both because it's incredibly long, huge book. I, I spent a lot of time studying 18th century history, both as an undergraduate at Newcastle and as a postgraduate at Cambridge, and therefore the 18th century means a lot to me. And I think it's just an interesting illustration of how where you're from and your environment that you grow up in can influence you very heavily. And in this case, Dr. Samuel Johnson was the best friend of Dr. John Taylor, who was because they both went to Lichfield Grammar School together, and he was the headmaster of my old school, which is the school that my sister and brother-in-law and two nephews went to, and my son is at now as well. So it's very much the family school. Father was chairman of the governors for nearly 20 years as well. It's Queen Elizabeth's Grammar School, Ashbourne. Now, a large amount of Boswell's Life of Johnson was written in Ashbourne and was written in the headmaster's house of my old school. So looking back to my childhood and seeing, you know, what was by then the girls' boarding house was actually the old headmaster's house, and that's where, you know, the library in there is where Johnson and Boswell and John Taylor sat of an evening, and Boswell sat there scribbling down some of Dr. Johnson's great thoughts. So that's all happened in the school I went to. That inspired me to go on to write, to study 18th century history at university, and that led to me writing the entry for Samuel Johnson in the Oxford Companion to British History. So there's a large selection of the 18th century entries in the Oxford Companion to British History were written by me, but that one probably means the most to me of all. So there's a book that's got some genuine connections.
We were at the National Literacy Trust conference last week, and it was there was some amazing talks and presentations all around how we are, you know, everything that we've read and kind of been exposed to and had the opportunity to experience as we've been growing up, and then actually that influences who we are as readers, as writers.
Yes.
Yeah, I love all of that. One of the talks was around smash hits, and I think some of my journey was influenced by smash hits. Not quite as wonderful as you know the things that you're saying there, Andrew. But it's really important that for all of our learners that they get that chance to experience all of those different types of writing, all of those different. I mean, I love, you know, history, historical writing. I love finding out about the past, and actually, it's that. How often do our young people in our classrooms now get those really rich opportunities? And we've got to make sure that happens.
I think that sort of feeds into the debate between sort of devices and books, doesn't it? That they operate on a different neurological level and lead to a different sort of ability to take things in. And I've been quite interested to see that in Scandinavia now there seems to be a particularly profound move away from devices in classrooms in order to have people reading a physical book, not from a sort of Luddite anti-technology perspective, but just because reading a book makes your mind work and your ability to take the information in work in a different way, which is really quite interesting.
And I think that's really important. And that's kind of that whole thing around the multimodal literacy, which is something that's being talked about a lot currently. And actually it comes back to books, it comes back to text. And I think there's that real balance between it being, because books, whenever I go with the training, sometimes schools say, so I need to get more books. And you're like, yes, can you? But it's actually inspiring through books, but actually having, for those youngsters that find it difficult, print a challenge, it's having the audiobook as well and having the, an immersive experience, a sensory story around it, or a story massage, or some of the real, especially with historical texts as well, some of the artifacts, some of the kind of things that you can have that bring you back or take you through into those kind of periods. When you were saying in terms of giving us some songs, you had quite a few to choose from. If Send were a song, what would it be?
Yeah,
And
so-
what?
Yeah, so I did have 3,267 because that's what whole life. But actually, it leads on really nicely from what we've just said. So I've been dying to bring it in, but I've been waiting patiently. So if Send were a song, like hear me out here, the song would be Hot Stuff by Donna Summer. Right. So bear with me on this. The reason is, perhaps I'm showing my age, but have you seen the film Full Monty?
Yes.
One of my all-time favourite films. And the funniest scene in that film. So just for people listening, the Full Monty is about set in Sheffield, about people who work, I can't remember, but they're at a job club and they're out of work and they're trying to make meaning of their life. And it's about that. It's really funny. And they end up getting into a sort of stripping act, a comedy stripping act through. It's not, it's fine. The film is absolutely fine. But there's this scene of them in the dole queue, and I don't know if you've seen this, in the job centre they're playing Hot Stuff by Donna Summer. Is it set in the 70s? I don't know, but
I know. I
can't remember.
learn it later.
Yeah, but they're standing in the job queue and they're all there and they're all just, and then when she starts singing, and I want to do the actions here,
Yeah.
I can't, so I'm gonna have to describe, audio description. They all start dancing a little bit, and you can see it just sort of start. It's like a ripple effect.
Shoulder. It's a shoulder, isn't it,
One-
Louise?
Yeah.
And then when she goes Hot Stuff, I'm going to try and do it. It's with the arms. They're sort of doing the thrust. It's comedy. It's a comedy thing, but it's so funny. It's so funny because you see what they've been doing and what's become embedded in their lives starts to take on, and it's this one of them starts, then the other starts, and suddenly they're doing the whole thrust. And that's the point. That's where, if Send were a song, it's that gradual, it's that start doing it, and then you're influenced by it and it becomes automatic, and then everyone's suddenly doing it, and the whole dole queue is doing the Donna Summer thrust. That is what if Send were a song for me today, because that's like what we've been talking about, isn't it, with that school. And I think as well, in terms of, I could say so much about the white paper and we haven't got lots of time, but in terms of what's happening for us nationally with the white paper and with all the curriculum and the neurodivergent report, if we can just make Send, we can't make Send anything, but if we can make our provision more about whole practice, not just all the different parts doing their different thing, but and that inclusion, it's not an add-on. That whole practice, it catches on from the root, and then we get the specialisms, don't we? So yeah, that's my song.
And the ripple effect. Sorry, just the ripple effect in the job centre as one moves a shoulder and the other one. That's what we want. That's what we need to be having. It's that with your more mastery, having that little group, it's working, and then other people see it, and then somebody else sees it, and they're like, oh, we could try that, and we could try this, and suddenly, and people see why the purpose. And then it's not so tricky, like it's specialism, or you have to have. It's actually something we can all do together.
Absolutely. Yeah,
And,
couldn't
and
agree more.
I'm going back to
Likes
my
the
A.
roots. Oh, you're gonna
Yeah,
go for the
back to the
roots.
roots. You
Yeah,
see, the
good
acorn.
roots.
The acorn, it
Yeah,
grows, and
yeah,
then the roots,
yeah.
and then it becomes established. An
Mm.
interesting
Established.
fact. An interesting fact is they they did some research and they grew a tree in a laboratory with no wind coming in or anything, and eventually the tree toppled over from its own weight. So actually, this idea of sometimes having
Resistant.
people question us,
Yeah.
resistance makes our
Stronger.
metaphorical
Interesting.
tree stronger.
Yeah, yeah. How
Oh, I like that,
interesting.
Ginny.
Yeah,
Oh, that's it now.
yeah,
There we
yeah,
Yeah.
go.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And
Because
Yeah,
I have
needing.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
challenge, you
Yeah.
don't tighten up and you
Yeah.
don't kind of like think about it from a different angle.
I got my ADHD diagnosis just over 2 years ago, and it almost opened up my thinking to go, that explains it, and also allowed me to use that as an explanation, not as an excuse, but as an explanation into how I behaved and how I needed to react and relate to other people. It just gave me a whole new sense that if I'd have had that when I first started teaching, or even when I was a youngster, as a diagnosis, not necessarily as a label or it might just have helped me navigate my own crazy brain, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think because there's a lot of discussion around actually the use of labels and diagnosis and particularly, working in schools, there's a lot of conversation around, well, we don't want to label, we don't want to, but, as an adult, you saying that about, how that's helped you think, okay, that's why or that's actually why I think like that. I think that's one of the most important things. It's like, that's how come, because you think everyone thinks like that or everyone responds to something like that. And I think that Ginny and I have these conversations quite a lot around the wow moment of, oh, they don't. When you're presenting particularly and you're trying to present some information, you're like, oh, actually not everyone sees it as quickly or in the same way. So do in terms of that diagnosis, is that something like when you're speaking and when you're working with kind of like young people as well, is that something you would really recommend is something that does happen earlier on?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
there's a real feel, isn't there, that, oh, we don't need to be, and the waiting list is this long. But
Yeah.
my take is always, but it's going to be supportive, longer term. It's not just
Yeah,
right now.
I do think that. I think there's that we need people who need that diagnosis or need that support to be given that support. But I think there's on the flip side to it as well. I also think that it is really easy to take labels and to make labels. And somebody said to me, there was a campaign from many, many years ago that I used in my RE classes, and I've actually used in my marketing sessions since, about labels are for jars, not for people. And so that always landed with me. But I also think there's a lot of challenges around the terminology that's used: special needs, disadvantage, deficit,
order.
all those things are just in the UAE. I've been privileged to work in the UAE a little bit, and they use the phrase for those people who've got learning difficulties or that have got learning differences. They call them people of determination. And I think that's really much more powerful. I also like the idea that people who are TAs, there's a US model that's called interventionists, and actually they're interveners, and that rather than somebody's an assistant to the teacher or they're an LSA and they just get that, they're an intervener actually. Okay, we're going to go in and support and intervene. I think that's really important. So the terminology, language really matters. And I think that really is something that I'm really passionate about. I speak about that almost every single time I do start a presentation. I just want to let you know, if I go off on everything, it's not an excuse, but I want to give you a reason and explanation. So
Yeah,
I tell
think
people.
that's really important because it is around those labels. Because actually, it isn't that one label isn't the same for everyone. Somebody with ADHD is completely different, and actually, but it's about understanding some of the thinking or the processing time needed. I think that's my biggest thing when I'm when I'm going to classrooms and working with learners and with staff. It's like we just don't think of that enough, about that opportunity to really process and understand the learning.
And I think what you said about understanding ourselves and being understood.
Yeah.
That is that is, I think, puts it into it, understanding ourselves and being understood. And exactly like you're saying, Sarah, what would benefit an individual to feel valued and to be able to be in that classroom and to feel present and to feel valued? And not
I had a great conversation with a guy called Dr. Ian McCritchie, who's involved with the MCI Foundation and works in that space. He talks about young people being seen, heard, and safe, seen, and heard, and that's really important. And I think that is that psychological safety that Amy Edmondson talks about, and the other pieces in that. I think there's a whole lot wrapped up in it, and it's not like this wet walk mentality. Actually, if we understand people and we are understood, we start to do that real universal design for learning. We really think about how we can develop as societies. I think the biggest challenge in societies is that we don't care to understand, and therefore we don't care about difference, and it's my way or the highway type stuff.
And it's that psychological safety actually is really, really key. And again, that's that whole thing about this, it's not that there's something wrong with you or that you just can't do something. It is actually that there's a reasoning behind all of that. There's a difference in the way that you're thinking about this. I just need to get that and give you a bridge to help you to understand that information in the way that you need. Thanks for joining us this time on Catching Up with Sarah and Ginny.
Always a pleasure and never a chore.